Hello and welcome. You're listening to episode 9 of TAIT, that's TAIT, which is short for Talking About Immersive Theatre. In this podcast series, I chat to immersive theatre makers, practitioners, producers and performers about the work that they do and some of the processes that involves in bringing it to you. Unfortunately, during the recording of this episode, there were actually some technical difficulties. So at about 30 minutes, about halfway through, it seems like the conversation jumps in an odd direction. And that's because we lost some of the recording. So unfortunately, there's not a lot I can do about that now, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a warning. Enjoy. So I'm here at the Centre for Performing Arts at the University of Portsmouth with collaborative performance maker Ruth Cross to talk about her performance work. Hello, Ruth.
Hello. Hi.
So you've worked as a producer, facilitator, performance maker, and in 2009 you established your company Cross Collaborations. Can you tell us a bit more about your background and your training and how you kind of came about having that company?
Yeah. So from a really early age, I was doing dance and gymnastics and theatre with Playbooks Theatre. So
Okay.
it's a kind of a youth theatre based in the Midlands. And so I always loved performance. And they actually, Stuart Gill, who is the director, had trained at Dartington. So I'd kind of heard of this place, Dartington College of Arts. And yeah, I went down, I grew up in Coventry and I'd so very kind of in the city.
Yeah.
And I'd gone down to Dartington and just sort of explored this incredibly idyllic, beautiful countryside and fell in love with the place and and went there to do choreography and theatre practices. And I didn't do so much dance. I was more interested in how the audience experiences the work. So right from the very beginning, I kind of became fascinated by the experience and by how to navigate or guide the audience through a performance. And so that was seeded, I guess, while I was at Dartington, and that's something that I've been playing with since.
And I think for me, it's one of the things that makes theatre very distinct, I think, from other forms, is that centrality of the liveness and the staging of that disappearance in that moment that for me always makes it really exciting. And whenever I've been involved in kind of filming, it just doesn't have kind of that experientialness at the heart of it. For me, no matter what else I've ever done, that's what brings me back to it, is that moment of two different bodies of people, whether it's one-on-one or one on 100, coming together in that moment together. And I think experience is what drives our discipline, but I think it's also what drives me as a practitioner, and the same as you. It's that fascination with what happens between people in this moment for real right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's something about the kind of energetic kind of chemical kind of physiological response that happens in the body when we experience something. So I guess in a way, now I'm working as a performance maker, but also as an activist and also as a change maker. And so I guess for me, it's none of these forms are separate in a way, and my question is still the same depending on which avenue I'm kind of working in, which is looking at kind of what are the factors that allow us to feel change. So it's like, how do we experience change? So whether that's building a movement of people to go about making a more systemic change, I think it still comes back to the inner sensations of what's happening within us. And whether that's making a one-on-one performance, then it's all about the kind of sense of how do we create an experience where the audience feels physically transformed through their experience. And I think that kind of liminality really does sit at the heart, especially of anything which might be site-specific, immersive, interactive, participative. All of those things has that radical sort of potential that you kind of feel tingling in your skin on this kind of work, and that's what excites me as an audience goer, but as a maker as well. It's the possibility of
transformation.
Absolutely.
Which is exciting.
Yeah.
You mentioned, actually, which leads very nicely into my next question, you have described yourself on your website as an arts activist, and I was wondering if you could explain to the listeners a little bit more about what that might mean.
Sure. I guess it's a term that I use and then drop, depending on, as I'm evolving and as my understanding is changing. But there's something about it. It seemed, and it seems a very kind of apt way to bring about the kind of a resonance of these two parts of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So one being, as a performance maker and as an artist, and then I guess and the other is working within social change.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of bridge between them, which is the work that I've been doing with communities.
Yeah.
So, and even I guess there's something of my art practice, or looking at the art of invitation. What is it to kind of to look at empowerment or engagement? That when I'm working as a facilitator or within kind of reimagining activism, which is the type of work that I'm interested in, my art practice and how to invite people to participate it's the same kind of thing. So an arts activist or artivism, or there's kind of these terms that sometimes I feel I strongly relate to, and sometimes I don't, and sometimes like even the word activist is very
well, they have cultural baggage, don't they?
That's it, yeah.
And this is the other thing. So sometimes I guess the cultural baggage feels like the weight is right for you, and then other times like you need to put it down for a while. And I think I struggle with this too. It's this idea of, especially when people ask, what do you do? And you're like, okay, so trying to find the right word to describe these things becomes almost impossible. You're like, well, I'm not a director and I'm not a facilitator. And I guess I'm a performance maker, but I'm a scholar too. So there's all these kind of different hats effectively, and bags that you pick up all the time. But they're dynamic. You're never kind of fixed. But I think like you, it's the same as, it comes down to that transformational quality of engaging in any of those kind of roles within theatre practice or performance making. But also it's this idea of the invitation, and you're always making an invitation, and how do you do that, and what are the implications of making that invitation. So I think especially in the kind of area that we're working at the moment, there's so much focus on immersion as this kind of like all-encompassing term to talk about all this different kind of work, and actually I think there's a lot more subtleties going on within there. And I just find some of these big terms like activism is the same, isn't it? It has this huge cultural baggage, and in some ways it's slightly terrifying and homogenizing all at the same time. So
I've just come from last week. I was in Newcastle facilitating 3-day workshops in a festival called the Hidden Civil War, and a purposely very provocative title. And it was interesting because some of the people that were coming to the workshops were saying, I'm really interested in participation, so we always open with a circle, and we have a thing that we call a check-in, so that we can start to really meet and see the people that we are in the space with. So it's not that we're trying to impart information, it's that we're trying to share and co-create a space together. And lots of people were saying, I don't identify as an activist, I'm not an activist, and then would go on to say all of this amazing work that they're doing, or they're involved in groups that they're working with. There's something about that. There's something about this sort of terminology that almost it kind of paralyzes some people, and then I think sometimes it's like, why do we need to categorize so much and just throw it away? And actually, and
I think there's loads of terms that have that kind of issue in terms of, and also I think a lot of them are to do with where they come out of in our terms of our history as well, because activism is so located in that kind of 60s and 70s, I think, cultural recognition of it, and there was an aggression that came with it
Absolutely.
in that moment. And I think maybe that's one of the things that kind of alienates. And I think a lot of the times, even the term immersion for me has that kind of very similar, it's located very specifically in a very particular moment, and beyond that can be alienating, I think, to people. And I think activism is very much one of those terms that frightens some people. And participation actually is
also,
loads of people say, I hate anything where I have to participate. And it's because they have this, I think, a very fixed idea of some of the very aggressive practices that happened in the 70s that stick in the cultural memory. So they're like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be forced to take my clothes off or forced to do any of these some of the horrendous, ethically challenging things that happened.
Really ethically challenging,
historically. So I think we're always battling, especially in the work we do, how do you make that invitation that doesn't bypass those things, because you can't, but cuts through them in a way that extends a genuine invitation rather than bringing all of this terrifying I'm going to make you do something with it. That leads me into my next question, which ethics are clearly very much a central driving force of the work that you make, and an interest in social responsibility as well. Is this what informs that approach to participation that sits across all of the different kinds of work that you make, would you say?
Just think how I can explain this. So I'm really I'm fascinated by what it is to collectively make sense of the world that we're living in, and I think there's a certain approach to that, which is, as I was saying before, sitting in a circle with people and hearing from everyone, and actually in terms of it is quite a radical form of politics in a way. Like when we look at the idea of polis, like what it is to make decisions based on everybody in the space. And so again, another tricky term, but inclusion, which I'll just use now, and there's many other words that I could use, but for want of continuing to there's something about how is it possible, and is it possible to really acknowledge the diversity, the margins, and the kind of mainstream cultures that are happening in any space, and to really see, like, permaculture has a beautiful term, that the fertile space on the edge, and that space always has is the richest, and the edges are kind of where the mainstream culture and the marginalised cultures kind of cross over. And there's something of really, I'm interested in the what happens in that space within a community, within a performance, within a garden, within and so coming back to the idea of participation and what drives my work, there's something around really seeing and meeting each person who's contributing, and inviting people to share in the form that they feel able, and that kind of becomes the collective whole, whereas it's very different. So it's I guess it's kind of an experiential way of describing direct democracy. Absolutely. In a way.
Yeah, and I think in some ways it's even more complex than that, isn't it? Because democracy, and lots of theorists talk about this as well, don't they? Work since the kind of the 60s and 70s has been democratized in terms of process and practice.
Absolutely.
But actually that relies in some respect on majority, and actually that it's more complex.
It's much more subtle.
Much more subtle, much more complex than that. And a lot of this, the kind of work, especially the kind of work you make within this field, it's much more about collaboration than democracy in that way. Yeah,
it's true. And that's why we try not to, well, I don't use the word direct democracy, but because I think exactly collaboration has more power, but then also collaboration happens between, I guess it's like, it's when you think about, we use the term radical collaboration, which kind of which looks at like really exploring the human value of each person and looking at what can be collectively created, as opposed to things that are created that are excluding of another group.
But I think that term as well has been co-opted as well with politics with a capital P, that idea of radical, but actually in the truest sense of the term, the kind of anthropological sense of the term, anything which is transformative or has the potential to be transformative, which of course collaboration does, is radical in that sense of the word. So again, it has that kind of baggage attached to it, which has been sort of tainted in a way by its kind of cultural use, but actually it's something that's much more fundamental than sort of just something pushing against something. It's that idea of transformation again. So it all kind of comes back to that idea of an invitation and the way in which collaboration can achieve transformation.
Absolutely.
So I think that's something, and that's why I think it's something that's very powerful, because people ask all the time, why do you think there's such an appetite for immersive performance? And I think maybe that's actually why, is the root of it, is this idea of a genuine connection and maybe a genuine collaboration and participation.
I think there's it's something that that many kind of practices that I've been involved in, from kind of Buddhism through to different I'm just trying to think, like, there's many forms of ways that we try to seek a sense of like genuine connection, and I think our society has so many kind of very fractured ways of gratifying that sense of that deeper connection, and so there's something that happens in an immersive environment where somebody feels a sense of genuine a genuine respect or genuine need, genuine, like the performance wouldn't happen if they weren't there, for example, particularly in micro performance or one-on-one or immersive stuff,
which is terrifying.
You know, I mean, it is terrifying, but then it also means that you're valid and you're valued and you're showing up and you're being you as a human living in this moment are important, and you're here, and then we're all insignificant in the kind of wider.
And there's a risk for both,
things.
isn't there? And I think maybe that's where it's really shifted away from a lot of the kind of historical practices that this has come out of, is the idea, especially in one-on-one and micro performances, because if you're not there and they're not there, if you're both not there in that moment together, there isn't anything.
And I'm really interested, I was talking about Buddhism a second ago, but there's something about the practice of presence and presencing, that when, I mean, all actors, I would say, have to have that, whether that on stage, projecting to an audience, but there's something that shifts when, not only just when the fourth wall's gone, but when there's no stage and there's no audience and there's no chair and you're just two people or more people sat, and there's something about the honesty of the presence and the aliveness of that connection.
And often no fictive constructs either in this kind of work. So all of those things fall away, and it is essentially then just two or three people or a small group of people in that moment together, which for me is exciting and terrifying, and the risk involved becomes the value then, and what becomes the value then is you choosing to engage in that moment and in that risk.
And it comes back to ethics, which I think is really interesting, like how like a question that comes up all the time, whether I'm facilitating a group or whether I'm making performance work, is how do I ensure that, or how do we as makers ensure that people are ready and willing to experience what they're going to experience? And often you dilute or numb the experience if you tell them what they will experience. So we're so used to in life, we're so used to having like in teaching practice, you tell someone what you're going to teach them. You say, this is now what you're learning, and then you say, this is what you've just learned. And,
absolutely.
And it's, it's very neatly packaged and it's very accessible, but
we're very entitled as a culture as well, aren't we? We feel that we're entitled to value. And part of that value is being told what you're going to get, and those expectations being met. And so, and also the other thing is pragmatically as well, when you're trying to put this work in places, trying to explain and find a way of getting those people to come in to have that moment as well, without disrupting or destroying or unpacking the possibility of having that moment as well is really, I find that the most challenging thing is, how do you describe this to people, persuade people that they might want to come and enjoy it without destroying the possibility of that transformational moment by preempting it or meeting their expectations in a way that negates risk.
And I guess there's something that we were exploring in Meridian, the piece that you came to see at the Battersea Arts Centre, was really the three of us, Billy Beckley and Annabee Daly and myself, who were working on the performance, we really spent a lot of time in our R&D looking at how to be as receptive as possible to the audience member. So how do we set an invitation and then get a response verbally from the person that they're able to step into the first layer, and then through contact with that person, because it's kind of partly guided, the experience, being able to really be receptive to touch and to sense their level of relaxing into the experience, or coming away from the experience. And these are subtle, and then the ethics involved are still very they're very subtle, and there's lots of questions around it, and so there's something that we would always put in place, like, if at any point you feel uncomfortable, put your hand up, because there's something about even verbalizing I'm feeling uncomfortable when you don't, even that is quite something maybe for someone who doesn't feel comfortable. So putting your hand up is quite a kind of, we found that was the most easy. And then to not create any, the way that we make work, there's no right or wrong with the experience. So whatever the experience is what's happening for that person. And so it's not to create any shame or disappointment, but just to allow that person to kind of move into the next experience that feels safer for them or feels more appropriate, or which is it's really trying to enable and to create, to empower the audience to.
Well, it's interesting, because one of the ones that I've been to, because it's what I research and I go to as much as I possibly can, and Meridian really has stuck with me, and for two kind of reasons. One, I felt genuinely cared for in a way that I never have in any other kind of immersive experience or participative or whatever we want to call them experience ever. And the second thing was my complete inability to recognize soil on my naked skin. And I don't know why, it still bothers me now, just the idea that I just couldn't place what I was stepping on. And that was astonishing to me, that something, such a simple thing, such a simple connection, such a simple sensation that you would assume you knew, I didn't. And it stuck with me. It was quite a while ago now as well that I encountered that, but it was the care that was involved in that, and I've never felt so cared for in a situation like that, when there's a lot of risk involved, because you're blindfolded and you are entirely kind of, you lay your hands, you put yourself into the performer's hands in a way. I'm very comfortable doing it because I go to a lot of these things, so I'm always quite happy to take that initial risk, but I really genuinely felt I got the opportunity to relax into it in a way that I maybe haven't in other things. So I thought that was really lovely, and it really made me think about the difference between duty of care and duty to care, and what the distinction between that might mean ethically. And this idea of that I didn't recognise soil on the soles of my feet, which I don't know, it really bothered me. Because I grew up in the countryside as well. I'm like, how do I not know? Sand, I'd have known immediately. I grew up near the sea. I lived in Devon for a long time, and the beach is something I know between my toes. But how did I not know that it was soil? Because all the way through I was just thinking, I know this, but I don't know this. And of course you're confused because there's other smells, and like it's not orange and other things too. So then when it's revealed that it's like, I was like, how does my body not know that? How is that not something familiar to my skin?
Wow, that's really, it's very interesting. Yeah, there was a few things as we were researching around soil and the body, and one story that was passed down through generations of Indigenous culture in Aboriginal Indigenous culture is that on the soles of our feet we have receptors that can engage in the chemicals that are in the soil, and also the soil can receive the chemicals that are in our bodies. And so the soil, the mycelium in the soil can generate the plants that contain the kind of minerals and compounds that the tribes as they're moving through need to eat to stay in a healthy balance. And there was something about how disconnected we in our modern culture we've become from the natural world and
Absolutely.
I'm in my sort of activism work that there's a lot around nature connection, and in the residency that we run with the rollers in the summer, it's based in the Pyrenees, and so in Spain we're in a house in the top of the mountains, and we do a lot of adventure and work outdoors. We invite people to go on solo days and solo evenings sometimes, where they spend all night on their own under the stars. And we walk slowly, and we encourage people to take their shoes and socks off and to really experience what that is. But of course to then create an environment in the BAC, for example. It's one of the places that we showed Meridian.
That's where I experienced it, was at the BAC.
Where there's soil on the floor, and it's in a kind of contrived environment in a way. It's it's kind of that offer, or it's that sense of the natural world, but still it's kind of
it just perturbed me, and it's odd that that's something that kind of stuck with me and came and really that I've really held on to from that experience. The heat as well. I thought the heat was just it was one of my favourite experiences that I've had in terms of kind of a small micro performance, and I felt very cared for. The other thing that it kind of raised for me as well is, think about what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is training. You said from people's bodies, and I teach a unit on this to my students, and one of the things they always ask is, how do you know how to do this? And it's really hard to pass that on, because it is about experience, but it's about an attitude and a way of caring to and for people, and an ethics of approach, and something you learn how to kind of read the body, you learn how to read people in that way, and to try to either challenge those behaviours or try to support them. And that, I think, is going to be a big challenge moving forwards, is when people want to start to train performers potentially to operate within these kinds of modes of performance. But I don't think it can be taught like naturalism. I don't think it can operate that way. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that.
I mean, it is very interesting, because you're absolutely right. It's not just okay, so you place your hands on the back and then you lie the person down. There's thousands of things that are happening, the information that's sharing between.
Absolutely.
And so I trained for a year in shiatsu. So I have the kind of experience of working with working with touch in a really caring way. And that was something that was a direct influence into creating this piece. Taking it out of a kind of massage or therapy context, but still keeping that sensitivity. And we did a lot of practice and training. We had during R&D we had several people in just to feel different people's energies. So also we were working a lot with that kind of the subtle energetic responses. And often and then also getting a lot of feedback from people. How did it feel? Did you feel comfortable? Can we try that again and just see how it feels to sit you down? Or how would you like to be invited? How does it feel most comfortable for you? And sometimes people's responses are different. And
of course.
And how delightfully so
exactly,
that people's responses are different.
Exactly.
And so we just there's not a rule book. I think that's the thing, that's why it's so exciting, because each and every one of the times that we've created Meridian, it's been different, and there's something about the liveness of that response. It's like really slowing down all of the exchanges that are happening in body language, and in really being able to feel if the muscles are relaxing or not in the person. And I think there's a lot that happens in the body. Our bodies are incredibly intelligent.
I know.
There's a lot that's happening in our body that the person's mind can't pick up on yet.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, there's something about connecting at a deeper level that I find very, very appealing to kind of cut through the words. Like we've just had this problem with what is it to put these words in, and sometimes it's clunky and a word is understood in so many ways. But when you're working from human to human in a really kinesthetic way, you're able to read and to communicate in a much more subtle.
And it's not just a toolkit, is it? And I find I am interested, and I make the work I make, and you're exactly the same from what we've talked about, is that how do you teach someone to have the passions and the cares and the experience, because it comes from experience. I think making this kind of work and starting to understand other bodies and how you pull an invitation, how you offer an invitation, how you fulfill an invitation.
Yeah.
Is an amalgamation of everything I've ever known and learned and come to.
Of course.
Because of what drives me to care. And I am not quite sure yet how you might potentially, for example, go about doing a university course. Where you might teach these things. Because I think you have to have that initial sort of care and ethical consideration that underpins approaching this work. But it won't, like you said, it won't be like that forever. We're currently in that fertile ground of the margins. At some point, well, already it's happening, that's going to pull to the centre, and you'll be able to go to the West End and pay loads of money, and this will be commercialised, because that's what always happens. And as soon as that happens, there will be courses where you can learn how to be an immersive performer or actor, and that in some ways frightens me a little bit, because I know that I can't at the moment articulate how do you learn how to do this, because I don't know. I just do it because of all the things that drive me and interest me, and all the experiences that I've had. And also, exactly like you said, it's trial and error.
And it's invisible. Like, I guess that's the thing. It's what is happening is, you know, through years of meditating, through years of doing Tai Chi, through years of really like Qigong, through feeling, practicing as a performance maker, going to see thousands and thousands of immersive performances.
Absolutely.
And also for me, a really strong teacher is nature itself. Is actually looking at the design of the natural world, of nature, going for walks, looking for hours at a leaf. There's a practice called radical amazement, where you kind of look at a vegetable as you cut it, or look at a leaf, or look at the kind of fractal patterns that are happening. And there's something. I spent a year at Schumacher College, which is in Devon, actually on the same site as Dartington, but it's still there. It's looking at holistic science and systemic thinking and complexity. So I did a year where I was really kind of sinking into what are complex living systems, how does that work, how can we try and move from the very rational way of understanding this kind of very transactional way of thinking about life, which we've been in since the Industrial Revolution, well, pre actually. But
pretty much since a feudal system, I guess, in some proto-capitalist sort of way. Yeah,
absolutely. And how do we move from that, where we would get this kind of very commercialised kind of way of trying to commodify these types of experiences, and teach it in a kind of regimented tool.
Yeah, this is how you do it.
This is how you do it, A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
And how do we, I guess within all of my work actually is looking at inviting ways of people experiencing complexity, and when I facilitate as well, we're talking a lot about kind of systemic thinking and trying to offer games and lived experiences that allow people to embody that a bit. And it's kind of, and that's, so in a way there are ways of offering that, but it really, that practice invites us to look at how the capitalism and the patriarchy and like all of these things are within us and are playing out in ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think kind of, I've kind of gone to sort of like a meta level, but I think when you're talking about how does this, I mean, within this kind of the marginalized space of very kind of, it feels that kind of like a little gift almost that we have at the moment.
Absolutely.
As we're growing this kind of this kind of new field of immersive theatre. But when it becomes more of a commodity,
yes,
or if it becomes more of a commodity, which I agree with you, it probably will. It's the way that's doing is it's kind of it's continuing the kind of exponential growth, which is it's kind of underpinning the way that we're living our lives. And I guess in a way my work with this type of immersive work is looking at how to challenge a system that's looking at exponential growth. So the fact that actually the kind of the essence of what we're trying to create in these experiences is looking at degrowth, it's looking at gift economy, it's looking I mean it's never, we were just having a conversation on the way in about when you're doing an immersive one-on-one piece, you don't, not many people get to see it because it's just one person at a time.
Exactly.
It's not, it doesn't
okay.
work on, and that's perfect.
That's fine.
It's and I mean, if you're talking about the economic value in a monetary way, then we're back in the kind of
but how do you place a value on experience?
On the experience, and that's really, I guess, the kind of crux of what I'm really interested in is like changing economic value from being something that's money and finance driven to looking at human value and human
Absolutely.
Experience.
I spend a lot of my time trying to explain. Okay, so we were talking about heritage and everything, but so I think potentially you're right. I think people have been doing this because people are people and people need people.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us back to one of the earlier things we were talking about actually, which is why is there such an appetite for this? I think there's always been an appetite for kind of play and for games, and actually we're allowed to do it less and less in this kind of consumerist sort of capitalist society that we live in. And I think that is this desire for human contact in an age where we are more fragmented and alienated than ever, I think, before, and the fact that we're not allowed to really play once we're adults anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, we're very fortunate. We both work in an area where play is
exciting and very much invited, and
the heart
really
of it, and
exactly
our job.
Yeah.
But kind of, as a lecturer at university, in some respects, I'm kind of paid to play.
Yeah.
With ideas, paid to play. So I'm very, very fortunate, and I know that I have kind of that sort of privilege in my life, which I feel very, very thankful for. So I wanted to kind of bring us back to sort of the beginning and sort of take a journey through your previous works, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Actually, from what I could tell, one of your first early pieces of work was something you began at the Barbican in Plymouth, which is really funny because my first piece of work was on the Barbican in Plymouth. When I saw that, I was like, oh my God. I was like, all of these, actually everyone I've spoken to, everything seems to come back to Battersea, everything comes back to Dartington. All of these things have these kind of little moments of confluence. And so I'm like, wow, this is very exciting and interesting. And I think it's high time and a PhD student started to potentially maybe trace these cultural lineages of this kind of work back to these little sites, I think, where they're bubbling out of. But I'm digressing now. So in 2009, you started a social letter project called Post, Present, Future that has been ongoing, am I right, even now. I actually took part in it, and I got my letter earlier this year.
Oh, fantastic.
So I opened it and I read it and everything, and because I had completely forgotten, and when my mum, because it went to my parents' address, I always put everything to my parents' address because I move around, but my mum said, "Oh, this came for you." I was like, she's like, "It's your handwriting." She was like, "I don't know what it is," and I was like, "No, I'm not sure." I was like, because sometimes I do other things like this too, and then when I opened it, I was like, "Oh my god!" And so
brilliant.
I was thinking of recording it and putting it as a PS afterwards, so you can have a listen to what I wrote in my letter.
Yeah, fantastic.
To myself.
I would love that.
And I took loads of pictures and stuff as I was opening it and everything as well. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about that project. So it was called Post, Present, Future, and it began right at the beginning.
It began at the beginning.
It began at the beginning.
It did begin at the beginning, and I'd love to talk about it actually, because it's kind of re-emerged although it's constantly evolving. I've been doing it for 7 years. But it's this summer it re-emerged in a really beautiful way, so I'll move on to that in a minute, but I'll explain what it is first. It began, I was at a kind of old vintage kind of market, and I bought a writing bureau, and it was £50, and I managed to, I just said very confidently to the guy, "I'm going to pay you £10 for that." And he looked at me and I kind of like, "That's a ridiculous discount." And he said, "Okay." And so I bought this incredibly beautiful old writing bureau with like a red kind of leather
I think it was there at BAC when I wrote my letter.
I've been carrying it around for many years. And so this project grew, and I've always been interested in the kind of in people's understanding of where they're at in their life and their future, and this sense of how we self-author our own lives. And so this kind of play with what it is to to kind of invite ourselves to step into our potential, invite ourselves to step into our future. And so this project emerged where I invited people to write a letter to themselves, and in 5 years' time, I would post it back to them. And for the first 5 years, it was brilliant because I didn't have to do any posting back.
No, exactly.
So I was just collecting, being invited to all these brilliant places around Europe, to different theatre festivals, to events, to the Transition Network, the first international Transition Network. So lots of people who are thinking already about the future, looking at post fossil fuels and kind of zero carbon society, and so there's many letters from people from that conference, which was also at the Battersea Arts Centre, looking in 5 years where they thought the world would be, and so the provocation was to think about you and your life, and have some time to just sit with yourself and reflect on how things are for you. And so it's like I see it as sort of a personal one-on-one performance in a way, at all stages. So the moment that you're sat at the desk writing, and then 5 years on, a letter arrives to your house or to your parents' house, or and then so you're sat there with a mug of tea, perhaps on your favourite armchair, or you've gone for a walk and you found a bench that you often sit at, and you're kind of reading this thing that you wrote to yourself 5 years before, and there's something about that space. People. So maybe 5,500 letters I've collected in total.
Wow.
And I'm 2 years into posting them back and still collecting more.
Of course,
so it's kind of this it's a lifelong project, really. It's
endless letter. Posting as well. Do you have a system in place now?
I have a system.
Posting?
Yeah, otherwise I'd go a bit mad. Yeah, I have support and lots of people getting involved. thankfully. And along the way, I've been making performances or sharings or doing readings of the content of people's letters,
Wow.
which has been a real delight, a kind of really interesting way of kind of tapping into what's present in society today. What are the concerns that people have for their future and for the future at large? This summer in August, I was invited back to TAIT I, which is a festival, a citywide art festival in Ostend in Belgium.
Okay.
And 5 years ago, in 2011, I'd been there, collecting letters, and the festival invited me back, and they said, you know, we'd like you to do something big to kind of to share this.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, wow, it doesn't invite something big.
No.
In a way that it's such an intimate.
It's about something small and intimate. Yeah.
So I was collaborating. I invited a dear friend of mine, a filmmaker, Isla, to come with me, and we went and we knocked on the doors of the people 5 years on who'd written the letters, 5 years to the day, and hand delivered their letters back to them.
Oh wow!
And went into their homes, and if we were invited, which we were, overwhelmingly so, and offered a drink, and then we asked if people would like to read their letter and if they'd like to be filmed while they're reading their letter. And so we used film basically as a way of capturing the kind of intimacy and the delicacy of this kind of moment, very emotional and highly charged often, in someone's own home, which was, for me, I mean, the whole of this project has just been a performance piece for me, in a way. I've had thousands of conversations with people. And this was the first time in the whole project that I'd heard people reading their letter out loud after 5 years. So we had the festival was over 2 weeks, and the first sort of 10 days we were there filming. We filmed sort of 25 people in their homes. Wow. And then had a few days to edit and create this film that had to premiere at the festival the final weekend, which was as you can imagine, like brilliant. Yes. And quite kind of Isla was incredible at trying to bring about the quality of the individuals and also the quality of the project in itself. And now we have a 20-minute film of these people sharing.
But it's so interesting because as well as being that kind of intimate, beautiful kind of performance of the self to the self, in a way, it also, all of those things it's like a huge cultural document that documents the moment and the future. So, but of course they go back, so you are left effectively with nothing because they go back to the people that they came from. I mean, it would be amazing to have those as like a huge volume, but then that takes away that personalness. So I love the idea of the film, but you couldn't possibly hand deliver all the 5,500 from all over the world
and
capture those things. So, but I think in terms of that, I mean, that's an incredibly huge kind of cultural documentation project, just in a way as well. I think that is, and I love the fact that it's ongoing as well. It's lovely.
5 years ago, I was thinking when I began, like, wow, this would be an incredible PhD, and then
absolutely,
and it would, but my life has gone in so many different directions, and there's something about with this project kind of homing in on the experience. And for me, that's what I delight in. It's really being able to share that.
And they belong to someone else, don't they, as well?
Yeah. And being like I'm very quite keen to kind of to tell people this is for you. It's not something that I'm doing for myself. For me, the conversations with people is the fascinating thing. So already I've had a gift. I've already received a lot from this project.
But even just giving people a moment sometimes, even just giving people that moment at the bureau, the moment of writing the letter in itself is a permission that we don't often have in that way as well. So you give us that gift of knowing ourselves for a few moments, and then we get that gift enriched even more when in 5 years' time we get the chance to revisit that and to reflect on that. And I think that is really lovely as well, is that it's still an invitation. Even though you're absent in some respects from that, you're the facilitator of that moment. And I think that's very beautiful.
And it was interesting to really to see in this 5-year period the amount of changes that had happened in people's lives and what they expected and what they didn't expect, and how they reacted to reading their own writing on this page. And it was incredibly emotional for a lot of people. One woman's husband had died, and it was so significant, the letter, because they scattered his ashes at the point where the desk had been, which just happened to be on his favourite pier where he went swimming.
Wow.
So he wrote his letter, and he said in his letter, I hope to be, in 5 years' time, I hope to be able to come here to the pier. And he was there in a way. Yeah. And so, and this woman's so strong. Wow, it was really, exceptional. So there's a sense of like meeting these moments of ourselves, and actually we don't need to go out to seek an external performance, but there's something about how in our own lives we can just really mark those time. I guess that's what the letter does. It's like it's just a marking, a tracking of time in our lives, so that we can like a ritual to come back to ourselves in another way.
I miss that as well, I think. And that's my own personal nostalgia, but I have a bureau too that I picked up for nobody secondhand, and I've refurbished it. It's full of all my writing things that I don't use anymore. And I've got all these beautiful writing papers and old-fashioned pens. And when I was at university, I used to write to my dearest friend. We used to write to each other and send each other letters all the time. And I don't do that anymore. And I miss letter writing. And for me to get that letter from myself from 5 years ago, not only reminded me of kind of gave me that chance to think about all those things I had kind of in the letter itself, the content, but the act as well. And it was lovely to receive a letter. There wasn't a bank statement or something that had just been printed out of a computer. And there was something really beautiful about that social ritual, which is definitely something that's being lost. I think that art of letter writing. Because it used to be a real art, authors, people used to want the letters that they wrote to people, and I have huge collections of Sylvia Plath's letters and Oscar Wilde's letters and all these sorts of things. And of course that's not going to happen anymore, I don't think. So I love the idea that it's going to kind of persist with that kind of, in some ways, a ritual that's being lost in our culture. And again, it's time, isn't it? Because people used to take the time to write a letter to each other and to share a bit of themselves with someone else. And it's very quick now to do that. Text, email, Snapchat.
Exactly.
All the other many ways.
And I think that's one thing why people are kind of exactly what you've just been describing is something why people feel so enticed to engage. I think that's why there's constantly interest in people writing, and because it is so unusual, it's such a kind of a lost form. And I mean there's moments that have changed my life forever, that I feel like I've been transformed through this project. And sitting or inviting a 95-year-old and a 5-year-old to be sat next to each other just by chance, having this conversation about what they were writing about, when the 5-year-old was writing to himself twice his age, which is something a brilliant concept of like twice the amount of time you've been on this life, I'm going to receive this letter. And the 95-year-old's also partner had died, and she wasn't sure if she was going to be alive in 5 years. And so just the fragility of time in a way, and our experience of that, and how we share that, and and so there's something around that sense of gifting ourselves the time just to check in and to really be touched by by how time is passing and how we're experiencing our life, because I think it is so it's so easy within this, while you're texting everyone and we're emailing all the time, that years go by.
Yes,
and we're reflecting in a way. We have a reflective culture, but not in this kind of, in a deeper sense.
No, it's all very surface in that respect. And for me, the one thing I never seem to have is time. And so for me, time is always something I'm kind of chasing. Time is always something I'm trying to carve out. And so to receive something kind of from back in time, in a moment when I took time, was very wonderful. And it was a surprise, because I had forgotten as well that I had kind of done that. And then so when it came, but instantly then I remembered, and all these things come back as well. So it's like a double gift you get in some ways too. I was going to kind of go through all of the work, but I don't want to keep you for too long. So I wanted to, obviously you've worked at the Barbican. We've talked a lot about the kind of the sort of micro one-on-one work. And I know you've been involved in some sort of bigger immersive projects. Could you talk about a couple of those? I know that The Good Neighbour was something you did that was audio based. But the Poly in Falmouth, was that a much sort of bigger project which you did in 2013? I think, wasn't it?
So that was a project where it was actually the beginning of me. So I'd been working as a producer at Falmouth University, and I gave it up to try and rediscover my arts practice, because I felt like through the teaching and through the producing work I was doing, I wasn't really able to fully experiment in ways that I'd wanted to. Absolutely. And so the Poly, which is a beautiful old building, it was originally a polytechnic, so this kind of place of science, and this and it had many phases throughout its history, and is now a really thriving theatre and cinema space in the heart of Falmouth. And I was lucky enough to live right opposite, and so I made friends with the people there and could go in every Sunday and explore the history and the context of that space with scientists and with artists. So I invited people to come and to so it was a space of collaboration, so using all of our different practices to explore the site. And so we created over many months of meeting on Sundays an immersive performance that took people on a journey around the space, and we had scientists and artists and performers, makers collaborating together. So I worked as a kind of overseer, facilitator, and a director, but in a way that I didn't, and with a lot of all of the work that I make, without having a kind of an end that I'm working towards. So really in that sense of not just devised theatre, but a devised process, actually, when it's kind of starting to really invite people to follow their own inquiry.
Well, it's a genuine laboratory in kind of the truest sense of the word as well, with all of these disciplines kind of coming together, all of these different collaborations, and especially to explore that site is very much about being a laboratory, I guess.
Exactly.
Of course, you never know what's going to happen when you do an experiment. That's
exactly.
kind of the point. If you do, you wouldn't do it.
And the building lent itself so much to that. It had kind of, not only in its past use, but also there was the kind of really dark underground spaces with letters that had been written from hundreds of years ago, marking the conversations that had been happening between artists and makers and scientists. And so the first camera that was used in Falmouth was used at the Polytechnic, developed there. And then the first there was a kind of graveyard behind that there'd been a prostitute working in, and they had some, I can't remember the exact story, but they came into the context of the building, and also there was a brewery that was operating at another point from. So there's all of these rich stories that were kind of bubbling away, and there in old dusty files that no one was looking at, underneath in this kind of archive that was completely unarchived in a sort of total mess, but perfect for us because we could go and just investigate. And so that, I guess that what came out of that was the way of working, which was really looking at complexity theory in a way live. So not having an end goal, really going with uncertainty, allowing spaciousness, and not going in a linear narrative. And so the process and the performance that came from it were both kind of my first experiments into complexity in a kind of performance context.
Well, that becomes a risk in itself, aside from the kind of what you end up with in terms of the experience that someone that you risk and they risk. Actually, that process is difficult within the current climate as well, in terms of funding, research, money, arts money, is to say I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's actually fine. That's kind of the point. I don't know,
and that's exactly what I want to be.
Isn't
in
that
that
what
space of like
the very idea of exploration has always been driven by I don't know, what if, let's see. And I think that is being very carefully eroded out of certain contexts, which make it very challenging to do. So even the process itself becomes risky. To just say, okay, we're going to get into this space with this group of people, and we're going to play and see what happens.
And really meet each other. I guess that's the thing that I keep coming back to, the sense of not assuming or presuming what a scientist is and does and wants to bring, and actually just really meeting that person and the way that they understand the space. And that takes time as well, which is also another thing that that's quite challenging, and people don't have time, there's not funding to provide the time. But I guess that this is where this sense of social responsibility, or my activism work, comes in, because I'm not willing to change those things. I don't want to make a show that I understand, that I know, before I've made it, because I feel like actually I'm not then doing the things that I feel. There's kind of this proverb that really rings true to me. That's the actual the way that change is happening isn't the protest or the action. It's actually or the piece of theatre, for example. It's the process that's gone in to making it. The conversations that have happened. This conversation, for example, and the people that are listening to this conversation, and then how that kind of has this huge ripple effect. And that, for me, that's what I'm interested in, like the quality of how I do my actions on a daily basis. How I live is a performance, and is also my artwork, and is also my activism work. So everything being congruent, and I think slowly. I hope that, and I'm starting to see examples of it, that funders and kind of policymakers are starting to make changes and loosen the way that things are.
This idea of impact is becoming quite central to arts funding and to research funding, and it's woolly at the moment, but I think that's potentially where we're going to get to sort of expand. Like frost will kind of slide in gently and then push things out. But I think it's how ideology works. It's exactly that. It's not through large moments of crisis. It's actually through daily practice. That's how ideas, that's how beliefs, and that's how ideologies change. Is actually just by people doing them over and over and spreading that, and it's through daily practice. And I think that's why, in some respects, the work that always happens at the edges, the work that always is even marginal in a marginal discipline, are always the things that I think usually change me, transform me, or touch me the most, is because they're in a space where they can do that, because they don't have some of the pressures that sit within that huge commercial sector. Because of course they do have those pressures, they are driven to do those things. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something within. So another part of my work, a Rollers project, which is... that's what I was going to ask you to talk about. I mean, it kind of leads quite nicely on what you were just saying. It's, so it's a residency space that we have every summer, and in Spain, where we invite people to come and experiment and practice and share and co-create learning experiences for each other. And the first year we were focusing on climate and climate change, climate justice. And the second year, so this year that in 2016, we've been focusing on borders and migration, and the borders that we have
in us, and geographical borders and political borders. And just sort of bringing it back to what you were just saying about there's something around how policy is structured, that and within development work, so within aid and within development, that I've lost what I was going to say. What was I going to say? It was a really good point, but I had to explain Arolas before I could move on to it, and now I'm just thinking about Arolas. You were saying about funding and the way funding was structured.
Yeah, and the fact that
about
we change ideology
through our practice. Yeah. So there's something around within development. We're really we're interested in looking at how it's not about having all of the answers and having a fixed kind of model and then taking that to another part of the world, and that working there, and then taking that to another part of the world and that working there, because as we know from theatre, everything's contextualised.
Absolutely.
So there's
it has to be produced in and by and through those localized contingent conditions. It's peculiar, and that's fine, because life is and contexts are peculiar. In the truest sense of
absolutely,
it can't work everywhere.
So the work that we're trying to create now, often using performance and creativity and the principles of creativity and collaboration, it's bringing that into experiences along a migration or different migratory routes. So working with people who are asylum seekers and refugees, and working with people as humans, and this sense of like all of the same language, inviting people to engage in a space, and listening to them, and allowing ourselves to be invited by them into engaging in a space. And so there's this sense of truly coming back to what I was saying at the beginning. It's like, how do we make sense of this situation together, and not having an idea of the end that we're trying to achieve, and really writing the script together. We're writing the process as we're going, and then that also is starting more and more. I mean, it's really at the edges, but it's more and more starting to be able to get funding, that type of work. Absolutely, but it's so different to the way that the majority of NGOs and development kind of organisations are working, and governments are working Well,
it's about narrative, isn't it? You have to become adept at the way you frame the narrative for this kind of work, so that you can access, and that is the reality of it for us, though, isn't it? We have to access funds of one kind or another in order to enable this kind of work to happen.
Absolutely.
And that's just a pragmatic kind of reality of working in research or arts, or somewhere that kind of sits between the two.
And there's something about the human experience. You were asking before about how we document Meridian, and one of the ways is to sit. One of the performers would sit with the audience member afterwards on a sofa, and they would have a conversation. Absolutely. And Annabelle sometimes would write down some things that the audience member had said, and sometimes it was recorded, I think, at a certain...
I wrote in a book, and I washed my feet as well.
Yeah. And there's something about that in this kind of tiny, immersive one-on-one, or one-on-four... micro performance. How you not only get, yes, we did this performance to 12 people today. It's more like, what's the quality of that, and how then how can we work with the quality of that to then enable this to happen in the future. And then we're learning. I've been learning through that kind of environment how to take that into the work that I'm doing now on a much larger scale, and to start working at all kind of levels, looking at policy change, and allowing people who are creating policy around migration to be able to really hear the case studies, and not just the case studies, because that sounds too
Well,
formal, but
insight,
it's like the
isn't it?
stories
Yeah.
and the lives and of the experiences of exchange between all types of people.
Well, I think one of the things about this kind of work is actually it can generate empathy and insight in a way that other forms potentially can't. And that's because everyone who becomes involved risks in a way, and everyone has the possibility or the potential of being transformed. The artists, the participants, and people who fund it, engage in it, employ it, take it, all of those things. So, and that for me is, I think, what I very much felt in the work of yours that I have engaged with, and it's one of the things that continues to interest me as an audience member, and but continues to interest me as a maker and a researcher as well, I think. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come all the way down here to Portsmouth. I know we're a little bit out of the way as well, so to talk to me.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
How can people, what's the best way for them to kind of find out what you're up to and what you're doing and when they can come and see stuff? Is it Facebook, Twitter, website?
We have two websites. So one with Cross Collaborations, which is more of my own personal practice. Yeah. And then for more of the kind of the environmental and social change work, it's with the Auroras Project. So it's the aurorasproject.org. And both have also Facebook pages, so
great, so people can get online and go and have a look and find out
please
and get in touch.
Like I really love talking about this stuff, so I'm really interested. I love getting in contact with people, and so
lovely. Well, thank you very, very much, and I hope people log on and have a look and see what you're doing, and just keep us informed about the next piece of work as it comes up and available for us to engage with.
Great, thank you.
As promised, I was going to share my letter from Post, Present, Future with you. It's dated the 2nd of the 4th, 2011, and this is what I wrote. Dear Joanna, you are 32, sat at an old writing table in the BAC London. You have had an amazing afternoon of one-on-one experiences. You are alone as ever, because Nigel is at work in Cambridge, along with all the cats. You have just become a doctor and are at the start. Out of limbo, but right at the start. You're teaching, making work and researching. You want a baby really badly and are thinking about how to go about making your body a home. I have some advice for you now. Stop waiting and start living. You laid in a coffin today and thought about your life. Stop waiting. Start living. Love too much, laugh too much, and smile too much. Be yourself, be good to yourself, and be good to those who you love. Remember to laugh, remember to love, remember to cry. I hope that old me is finding present me happy and full up. All good things, Joanna. I hope you found that episode interesting and enjoyable. As usual, I would really love to hear from you, your thoughts and feedbacks, comments, whatever that might be and wherever you might be. I really appreciate all of the emails and all of the contact that I've had from people listening so far. And I wanted to give a big shout out to Vicky in Maryland, to Emma here in the UK, Laurie and Bridget who are in Australia, and Andrew in New York. Things have been a little hectic here in the world of TAIT, but I will be reaching out and responding to all of you who've been in touch over the next couple of weeks. Do subscribe, as there's going to be lots of exciting things in the pipeline for 2017, and you really don't want to miss it. And as usual, please keep sharing. Share with anyone you think might find this interesting, useful, or just enjoyable. So finally, I'd like to wish you all a really happy new year. And I hope that 2017 will bring you joy and prosperity and be fruitful for you. So until February, ciao.